The corridors of Aldermere House on the evening of a formal dinner had a particular quality of controlled motion, like a river whose current ran unseen beneath a glassy surface. Footmen moved with the precision of ceremony. White gloves, livery the color of midnight and gold, faces composed into the particular blankness the occasion required. Cecily Ashworth had arrived to the house only 3 days prior, as the Duke of Aldermere's intended, and already she understood that she was to be one more element in the composition, arranged to reflect well and speak little. She had paused near the entrance to the long corridor to allow a parlor-maid to pass with a candelabra when she saw the profile of the footman at the far end. He was lifting a silver epergne into place on the dining table, his back partly turned, and the line of his jaw was caught in the light from the sconces on the left-hand wall. Cecily's body stopped before her mind formed the thought. The sense that moved through her was not recognition as she had ever experienced it, not the pleasant surprise of a familiar face in a crowd, but something far more physical. A contraction of the chest, the sudden cold of her hands inside her gloves, a loss of the room around her that left only that profile and the quality of the light on it. Her lips parted. She did not speak. The footman reached, as he always had when he was thinking, as he had always done in the small rented rooms above a chandler's shop in Portsmouth when he was worried or uncertain, for his breast pocket. His fingers settled there for a fraction of a second, over the place where he kept what he kept. Then he lifted the epergne again and turned. His eyes found her before she could look away. Thomas Crane was alive. Thomas was wearing the navy and gold livery of the Duke of Aldermere's household staff, and he was standing not 20 feet from her, with the same blue-gray eyes that had watched her sleep 4 years ago, and the face that wore them had been changed by weather and what she could only imagine, but the bones beneath it were the bones she had memorized. She did not faint. She did not make a sound. She put one hand against the corridor wall and breathed, and his face went the color of ash, and neither of them said the word that was in both of their mouths at once. There had been a morning in June of 1811 when Cecily Ashworth was 19 years old and living in her father's rectory near Purbeck, and she had said the words after a curate in a cold church with only 2 witnesses, and the man beside her had been Thomas, the shipwright's son from the village, 22 years old and full of a kind of serious, contained joy that had always seemed to her the most honest emotion she had ever been near. Her father had disapproved. Her uncle Sir Gerald had not yet been told. The marriage had taken place in the first week of June, and Thomas had sailed with the fleet 2 weeks later, and by August the ship had gone silent in the official correspondence, and by November what silence means had been explained to her by a naval office clerk who had not quite met her eyes. She had not told Sir Gerald about the marriage. Not then. Not in the years that followed. What would have been the use? Thomas was gone. The marriage existed in a register in a Dorset church, and in the compass he had pressed into her hand on the morning of his sailing, a small silver disc with a hair-thin needle that pointed steadily north. She wore it still on a chain beneath her gown, against the skin above her heart, because some habits are not grief and not hope, but something that exists before either. Sir Gerald had been patient until she turned 23. Then the patience had acquired the character of pressure, and by her 24th year, it had become the particular shape of a man who controls the disposition of a property and who has run out of sentiment entirely. The Ashworth estate in Wiltshire was entailed away from female inheritors. Cecily's only claim on it was as Sir Gerald's ward, and that claim was not a claim at all, but a courtesy. And courtesies, as Sir Gerald had made plain over several dinners that winter, could be withdrawn. The Duke of Aldermere was a widower of 4 years' standing, sensible, correct, and willing to consider a clergyman's daughter if she brought adequate qualities of character and a clean family name. Sir Gerald had managed the introduction with the confidence of a man who has never been refused anything by a social system he has never questioned. Cecily had accepted because she had believed Thomas dead. She had believed it for 5 years, with the kind of believing that settles into the body's structure, that becomes the ground on which other things are built. She had grieved him privately, completely, in the way of a woman who has no one to grieve with because no one else knows that she had him to lose. She had said yes to Edmund Cavendish, Duke of Aldermere, in a drawing room in Portman Square in March. And she had told herself that the compass around her neck was not a symbol of anything except a habit she had not yet broken. Her first impression of the Duke had been of a man whose stillness was not coldness, but cost. He was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped dark brown hair that had begun to gray at the temples in a way that his face had perhaps always been moving toward. There was a fine scar through his left eyebrow, faded and old, and his gray eyes held a watchfulness that she did not think was characteristic of a man who distrusted the world so much as of a man who had learned, at some expense, to observe it carefully before he spoke. He addressed her with complete and formal courtesy. He offered her nothing personal and asked nothing personal, and watched her with the eyes that watched everything and revealed nothing. And his hand, once, at the end of their first meeting, had gone to his breast pocket in a gesture so brief she had nearly missed it. She had assumed it was a watch. She had not yet understood what it was. The formal reception at Aldermere House 3 days prior had been arranged by his aunt, Lady Harriet Vane, who had been managing the domestic operations of the Aldermere estate since Edmund's first wife died, and who managed them with the efficiency of a woman who considers management to be her natural right. Lady Harriet was 58 years old, tall and thin, sharp-featured in the way of a face that had once been handsome and had hardened into something more authoritative with age. Her silver hair was dressed high under a lace-trimmed cap, and her fan, a painted ivory affair, never opened fully and never closed entirely, but was held at a consistent 3/4, like a door a careful person keeps at hand in case of intrusion. Lady Sophia Pemberton had been present at the reception as well, which Cecily had understood immediately as a form of information. Lady Sophia was 26, polished in the manner of a woman who has been told since childhood that polish is a virtue, and she wore ice-blue silk and diamonds that caught the candlelight with what might have been artlessness, and was not. She had taken the chair nearest to Lady Harriet, and they had spoken in the manner of two people whose understanding predates the occasion. Cecily had been standing near the window with a glass of Madeira she did not intend to drink, when Lady Harriet said to Lady Sophia, her voice just sufficiently low to be private and just insufficiently low to be inaudible, "A country nobody, my dear. Edmund has the most baffling instincts for inconvenient sentiment." Lady Sophia's mouth had curved. She had said nothing. Her eyes had found Cecily across the room and contained an expression that was not unkind so much as already decided. Cecily had looked at the window. She had thought of Thomas, not for the first time since the betrothal, and had reminded herself that he was dead and that she was here, and that there was no profit in grief that had nowhere to go. She had not yet understood what stood at the end of the corridor in the dress of a footman. The second day at Aldermere House had been a day of the estate's routines, and Cecily had taken it upon herself to understand the house rather than wait to be introduced to it. This was not ingratiation. It was the instinct of a woman who had managed a rectory since she was 16 and knew that a household reveals itself to those who pay attention to it. She had walked the morning room, the library, The back passages. She had spoken to the housekeeper, Mrs. Caldwell, a round, steady woman who had been at Aldermere for 20 years, and who looked at Cecily with the careful neutrality of a person who has seen prospective duchesses come and, once, go. She had not gone as far as the footman's quarters. She had not seen him on the first day or the second. She had not known he was in the house. On the third evening, in the corridor outside the dining room, with the formal dinner being set into place behind the long closed doors, she had paused to allow a parlor maid to pass with a candelabra. And now he was alive, and standing 20 feet away. And neither of them was going to speak until they had remembered how. She had dressed that morning with the competence of a woman who has learned to make herself presentable to rooms that do not particularly want her, and she had come down to the south corridor with the intention of overseeing the placement of the table flowers, and she had put on her best composure the way she had always put it on, like a Spencer jacket, not for warmth, but for the semblance of it. None of that had prepared her for this. There is no preparation for the living fact of a person you have buried in your interior life, with all the care of a woman who has nothing left of the burial, but the small silver weight of the thing they gave you. The parlor maid passed. The corridor was briefly empty of everyone else. Cecily pressed her hand against the wall and felt the cool plaster through her glove and kept her breathing even by an act of will she had not known she was capable of. Thomas set the épergnon down on a sideboard rather than the table, very carefully, as though the silver might shatter, and turned fully toward her. They looked at each other across the 20 feet of corridor with the contained precision of two people who have the same amount to lose, and who have both learned, in different ways, to keep their faces from being red. He spoke first, very quietly. "Miss Ashworth," he said. The title was deliberate. The use of Ashworth rather than Crane was deliberate. He was telling her what he knew and what shape he was prepared to hold it in, and the gentleness of it was almost more than she could bear. "Thomas," she said. Her voice came out level. She did not know how. He looked at her for a long moment. His face held the evidence of 5 years she had not been present for, and the specific evidence of cold and distance, and something that had been, at some point, quite close to despair, though the blue-gray eyes still held that quality she had first noticed when she was 16, and he had come to fix the rectory gate, the quality she had always thought of as a kind of steadiness that had been tested and decided to remain. "You should go in," he said. "His Grace will be wanting to seat his guests." He picked up the épergnon and turned back to the table, and Cecily went down the corridor and said nothing to anyone for the remainder of that evening, and held herself together by the compass on the chain beneath her gown, which had pointed north without her asking for 5 years, and now had nowhere useful to point at all. If you have ever known the particular quality of a secret that has changed in kind, that was one thing, and is now something else entirely. You will understand the nature of the days that followed. If you have not, stay close. The morning after, Cecily had undertaken a deliberate inventory of what she knew and what she could not know. Thomas was alive. He was employed in the Duke's household. He was aware of her presence and had chosen the form of address that told her, without being told, that he knew the situation she was in. What she did not know was how long he had been in this house, or whether he had known she was coming to it, or what had happened to him in the 5 years between the silence of the naval correspondence and this corridor. She did not go to him immediately. She attended breakfast in the morning room. She answered Lady Harriet's questions about her father's living and her education with the composure she had been practicing for years, in rooms where composure was the only currency she had. He sat at the head of the table and said little, but was present in the way that he was always present, with a quality of attention that she had ceased to mistake for indifference. He watched her hands. She had noticed this in the first days. Not in a forward way. Not in the manner of a man who has decided something and is waiting to confirm it, but in the way of a man who reads character in what people do when they think themselves unobserved. Her hands had been steadier than the rest of her at breakfast. She suspected he had noticed the difference. On the morning of the fourth day, she was walking through the south corridor with a letter she meant to post when she heard, from the servants' passage beyond the closed door, the sound of a small child crying in the specific pitch of pain rather than temper. And she went in without thinking about propriety. A kitchen boy of perhaps 10 years, named William, had burned the back of his hand on a copper pot, and the burn was raised and red, and he was trying not to make more sound than he was already making. With the moderate success of a child who has been told that noise is not welcome in the kitchen, Cecily set down her letter, took his hand, looked at the burn, and asked someone for a clean cloth and cold water, and when the cloth came, she wrapped it and held pressure for long enough to make a difference, and then she tore a strip from the hem of her under petticoat, which was not visible and therefore could be spared, and bound the hand in it properly. "What is your name?" she said. "William, ma'am," the boy said. "Then you are very brave, William," she said. "And when it has had a chance to cool, you should tell Mrs. Caldwell, and she will see to the blister." She gathered her letter and left the kitchen passage, and did not look back, and therefore did not see the doorway to the south corridor, or the man who had been standing in it. The Duke of Aldermere stood for a moment in the empty passage after she had gone. He had come through that door to retrieve a letter of his own that Fentham had misdirected to the kitchen corridor, and he had stopped when he heard her voice through the gap. Not the words at first, but the register of her voice, which was different from any register she had used in his presence. He had heard her use the word brave. He had heard it as a woman uses it when she means it, not as a courtesy. And the boy had received it in the manner of a person who has rarely been on the receiving end of that particular designation, which is to say with a kind of still astonishment that outlasts the moment. He was not given to easy sentiment. His life had, in the space of 4 years, arranged itself around a number of things he had thought permanent and discovered were not, and the reorganization had produced in him a caution about allowing weight to gather on any single point of his regard. He was aware that he was doing something now that he had not done in some time, which was allowing weight to gather. He observed this with the detachment of a man who has learned to observe his own tendencies as he would observe a weather pattern, with interest and without surprise. And what he felt, standing in the empty passage after the sound of her footsteps had gone quiet, was not quite certainty and not quite comfort, but something in the neighborhood of both. The Duke of Aldermere stood for a moment after she had gone. He put his hand into his breast pocket, where the miniature of Francis lived in its worn leather wallet, and held it there for a moment. Then he went back to his study. That afternoon, the preparations for the formal dinner were in full motion, and Lady Harriet had occasion to pass the morning room where Cecily was sitting with a book she was not reading, and she paused in the doorway in the manner of a woman who has something to say and chooses the method of its delivery as carefully as she chooses everything else. "I hope you appreciate," Lady Harriet said, her fan 3/4 raised, "that the guests tomorrow are not a country reception. Lady Sophia will be among them. The Pembertons take some precision in the matter of precedence." "I understand precedence," Cecily said. "Edmund is very particular," Lady Harriet said, and the particular emphasis she placed on Edmund's name carried the implication that her intimacy with it gave her a perspective that Cecily could not approach. "It is why he has always found country nobodies such an inconvenience. They make such demands of correction." She was not looking at Cecily when she said this. She was examining a figurine on the mantel. The carelessness was the point. Cecily said, "Then I will endeavor not to demand correction," and looked back at her book. And Lady Harriet's fan moved very slightly. And then she left. It was the evening of the 4th day that Cecily went to Thomas. She knew where the footman's retiring room was because she had walked the house and because she had been paying attention. She waited until the household was at supper and went along the back passage and knocked, and when Thomas opened the door and saw her, he stepped out and closed it behind him with the precision of a man who has learned to take up very little space. "You did not know," she said. It was not a question. "No," he said. "I knew His Grace was to be married. I did not know to whom." He looked at her steadily. "I nearly sent in my notice when I saw you. I did not know what else to do." "Thomas." She stopped. She put her hand against her sternum, over the compass, over the chain. "Where were you?" he told her. He told her quietly and with the same economy of expression she had always known in him, which was not coldness, but the habit of a man who has learned that words given carelessly have a way of costing what they cannot afford. He had been taken off the Texel roads in the winter of 1811, the ship crippled by weather before it reached action, and the men who took them had not been interested in names or regiments or the particular sorrows of their prisoners beyond what the sorrows could be traded for. 2 years in a Dutch prison outside Middelburg, in rooms that were cold in the way that stone is cold, without the character of warmth that wooden walls can sometimes hold. He had shared those rooms with 7 other men, 3 of whom died, and had learned, in the way that people learn things when the alternative is to stop entirely, to hold on to a very few things with a great deal of care. He had written once, from a Dutch harbor town, but the letter had never arrived, or had arrived after whatever had been reported to the Naval Office had already been accepted as fact. He had come back to England in 1814 and found his father dead, and the village changed, and Cecily gone from the rectory. And he had not known how to find her, or whether, after 3 years of silence, he had the right to try. "You had the right," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "You had a life," he said. "I could not see that I had the right to disturb it." She touched the chain through the fabric of her gown. "I have the compass," she said. "I have worn it since you left." His face did something that was not quite grief and not quite something warmer, but existed in the territory between. He reached into his breast pocket and produced the twin of it, the mate's compass, which he had carried for 5 years across a prison and a Dutch winter and a long walk back to England. They stood in the back passage of Aldermere House in the candlelight, with their compasses in their respective hands and the truth of the matter between them. The marriage was real. It was recorded in a register in a Dorset church. She was his wife by law, and had been for 5 years. And nothing that had happened in between had altered the law's position on the question. She could not marry the Duke of Aldermere without committing a sin she was not capable of committing, and she could not remain silent about what she knew without committing a different species of the same sin. She was to have lied by omission to a man who had done nothing to her. She was to have taken a title and a household and a future on the strength of a secret. And the compass around her neck would have pointed north regardless, unmoved by the moral direction she had chosen. "What do you want?" she said. Thomas looked at her for a long time. "I want nothing that I have any right to want," he said. "That has been my position for 5 years. I am well practiced at it." A pause. "You should know that if you ask it of me, I will say nothing. I will leave the household. I will make no claim. I am not going to ask it of you," she said. His eyes held the steadiness. "No," he said. "I did not think you would." She put the compass into the pocket at her waist and went back up the corridor. And the decision she had made was not yet spoken aloud, but it had the weight of something already done. The following morning, Sir Gerald arrived from London. He arrived with Mr. Fentham at his side, which was the first signal that the conversation to come had been arranged in advance. Fentham was the Duke's steward, a careful man of middle age who moved through the household's business with the precision of someone who has learned that his function is to transmit information without inflecting it. And he came to Cecily in the morning room before she had finished her tea with the quiet of a man discharging a duty he does not enjoy. "Lady Harriet has asked me to convey," he said, "that Sir Gerald has arrived and wishes to speak with you before the dinner preparations begin." A pause, the kind that carries more than it intends. "Her ladyship also wished me to convey that a country nobody who creates difficulties for this household will find, the household takes a very long view of such difficulties." He said it with no expression. He did not believe it, she thought. He was simply the medium through which the message passed. "Thank you, Mr. Fentham," she said. He left, and she set down her cup. He had been sent for by Lady Harriet, which Cecily understood when she came down to find them together in the library, with the door not quite closed, and the particular quality of their voices through the gap told her everything about what kind of conversation it was before she heard the words. She went to the doorway, not to eavesdrop but to enter, and stopped because her own name had preceded her. "The girl," Lady Harriet was saying, "has formed some acquaintance with one of the footmen. Fentham observed them in the back passage last evening in what he considered a private exchange." "A footman," Sir Gerald said. The contempt in it was impressive in its efficiency. "A specific footman," Lady Harriet said. "Fentham tells me the man's name is Crane. There may be a prior connection. Edmund's business interests require a marriage that is not entangled. If there is any entanglement, it needs to be resolved before the dinner." "Resolve it," Sir Gerald said. "Pay the man what he wants. She is a country nobody with a tendency toward inconvenient sentiment, and if she has created a difficulty, it is precisely the kind of difficulty I have been at pains to manage." Cecily stepped into the doorway. The two of them looked at her. Lady Harriet's fan rose to its three-quarters position. "I could not help but overhear," Cecily said, which was not quite accurate, and she did not attempt to make it so. "You are speaking about Crane. He is not a difficulty to be resolved. He is my husband." The room was very quiet. "We were married in June of 1811, she said, "in a church in Dorset. I believed him dead. I have believed him dead for 5 years. He is not dead. He is a footman in this household, and the marriage has not been dissolved. And I cannot marry the Duke of Aldermere because I am already married, and my husband is alive in this house." Sir Gerald set down his cup. He said with great control, "You will say nothing of this." "I will say everything of this," Cecily said. "Tonight, if necessary. To His Grace, in the presence of whoever is present. You will destroy yourself," Sir Gerald said. "You will destroy the estate. You will destroy whatever chance you have of any position at all. A secret marriage to a sailor. You will be a laughing-stock at best, and a criminal at worst. No one will receive you. You will have nothing." "I will have told the truth," Cecily said. Lady Harriet's fan moved. It was the closest she came to expression in that moment. Something in the set of her mouth was not quite what it had been before, but she recovered it before it could be named. "You are being very foolish," Lady Harriet said. "I expect I am," Cecily said. "But I am not being dishonest, and I find I can only manage one thing at a time." She left the library and went upstairs to dress for dinner. The formal dinner at Aldermere House assembled 12 at the table on the evening of the 5th day of Cecily's residence there. The Duke sat at the head, Lady Harriet at the foot, Sir Gerald to the right, Lady Sophia in her ice-blue silk 2 seats down, and the remaining 8 guests arranged in the precision that Lady Harriet had spent 2 decades perfecting. Cecily sat where she had been placed, halfway down the left side, and the footmen moved with their trained silence, and he was one of them, carrying a tureen of soup from the sideboard with the face of a man who has decided what he is prepared to do and is waiting only for the decision to be required of him. Cecily waited until the first course had been served. Edmund Cavendish, Duke of Aldermere, was speaking to the man on his right about a parliamentary vote, and his voice was low and level, and his gray eyes were on the matter at hand, and his hand at no point went to his breast pocket, because there was nothing in this conversation that required that particular steadiness. He was, Cecily had come to understand over 5 days, a man who was most himself when the world required him to be present and efficient, and was willing to leave the rest of him alone. She was about to require considerably more of him than that. "Your Grace," she said. The table did not stop, not immediately. 2 or 3 conversations continued for a sentence or 2, and then the quality of her voice, which she had kept controlled but not quiet, reached the room, and the room settled into attention. Edmund looked at her. His gray eyes were watchful in the way that she now understood as his particular mode of readiness, of taking the measure of a thing before deciding what it required. "I owe you a truth," she said. "I should have told you before this. I did not know, when I arrived here, that it was possible to tell you, and I apologize for that. I know it now, and I am telling you." Lady Harriet's fan closed, fully, for the first time. "I was married," Cecily said, "in June of 1811, to a man named Thomas Crane. I believed him dead. He was not dead. He is in this house. He is among the footmen serving this dinner. I cannot marry you because I am already his wife, and I would not wish to marry anyone on the basis of a concealment. That is what I have to tell you." The table was very quiet. Lady Sophia's eyes found Thomas at the sideboard and moved back to Cecily with the expression of a woman recalculating something she had considered settled. Sir Gerald said, "Cecily," in a tone that attempted authority and did not find it. The Duke had not moved. His eyes were on Cecily. They held the same quality of watchfulness, but what ran beneath it now was something she had not seen there before, and could not, in the moment, name. He said to Thomas at the sideboard, "Crane." Thomas turned. He held himself correctly, the way he had learned to hold himself in this household, but his blue-gray eyes met the Duke's directly, without flinching. "You are this woman's husband," Edmund said. "Yes, Your Grace," Thomas said. The room made several sounds at once. Lady Harriet's fan opened to its 3/4 position and then stopped. Sir Gerald inhaled. The Duke looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Cecily. "You knew this," he said. "For how many days?" "Since the evening I arrived," she said. "I did not know what to do with it. I then knew what to do with it. I am doing it." He said nothing for a moment. His hand had gone to the edge of the table, not to his breast pocket, but to the mahogany surface, where his fingers rested and were still. "Lady Harriet," he said, without looking at his aunt, "was aware of this before this evening." It was not a question. Lady Harriet's chin lifted. "The situation required management," she said. "I was managing it." "You were suppressing it," he said. "There is a distinction." He rose from his chair. The table watched him rise. He walked the length of the dining room to where Cecily sat, and the sound of 12 people making no sound at all was the loudest thing in the room, and he looked at her face for a moment, as though making certain of what he found there. "She told me the truth," he said to the table. "I will not discard that." He offered her his hand, not as a man claiming something, but as a man acknowledging what she had done. Lady Harriet said, "Edmund," with the weight of 20 years' management behind it. "Thank you, Lady Harriet," he said, which closed the matter. He turned to the man at the sideboard. "You will be provided for," he said. "A recommendation to any household you choose, and the means to re-establish yourself properly. What you and Miss Ashworth require in the way of legal resolution, my solicitor will assist." He paused. "You did not leave willingly." "No, Your Grace," Thomas said. "Then you are owed more than a dismissal," the Duke said. "See Fentham in the morning." He returned to his chair. He sat. He addressed the man on his right with the quality of a man who has settled a thing, and considers it settled. And the dinner continued with the particular character of a room in which a great deal has just shifted, and only one person present is pretending otherwise. Lady Sophia left before the second course was finished. She said she had a headache. And she did. And it was the kind of headache that a woman gets when the evening has not gone as planned, in a way that no amount of planning could have anticipated. The weeks that followed were not simple. Simple was not the nature of what had occurred. He came to Cecily in Mrs. Caldwell's sitting room on the 6th morning, when the household had settled back into its routines as households will, and he sat in the chair she offered him with the compass in his hand, and said what he had come to say. He was not the person she had married. He said it without self-pity, which was the only way he knew how to say anything. 5 years had made a different man of him. Not worse, not diminished, but changed in the way that something is changed by forces that do not ask permission. He loved her. That had not altered, and yet he could see, with the clarity of a man who has had 5 years to understand the dimensions of what he lost, that what she had become in those 5 years was not something that his absence had produced in her, but something that had always been there and had grown in the space his leaving created. He was not certain he had the right to ask her to reduce it back to what he had known. She told him that she would not reduce herself for anyone, and that this was not a refusal, but a clarification. He smiled, briefly, in the way she had once known well. Then he became serious again. "The law will require a formal dissolution," he said. "The Duke's solicitor is prepared to manage it. It will take time and it will not be comfortable, but it can be done." "I know," she said. "And after that," he said. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at him 5 years ago across a cold church, with the same knowledge that this person was real, and that reality was the thing she had always valued most, and that nothing about what was happening now changed what was true. "After that," she said, "I think we are both different people, Thomas. I think the people we are now, we're not married to each other, and I think we are both honest enough to know it." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. She put her hand out, and he put his compass into it, alongside the one she produced from her own pocket. And they sat together in Mrs. Caldwell's sitting room, with the 2 compasses in her palm. And it was the most honest conversation she had had in 5 years, and it was also goodbye. In the spring, when the formal dissolution had been managed by the solicitor and witnessed by a senior clerk of the relevant office, and he had taken his recommendation letter and his means to Mr. Fentham and had left Aldermere for a position in a Bristol merchant house that had written back promptly and with interest, the Duke of Aldermere came to the morning room where Cecily was writing a letter. He sat in the chair across from her and said nothing for a moment. She set down her pen. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what honesty costs." "It costs differently depending on the currency," she said. His gray eyes held their watchfulness, but there was something beneath it now that she had begun, over the long winter and spring, to read more accurately. Lady Frances, he said, my wife. She died in childbed, and I was not present, and there are people who have told me on various occasions that this is a thing I ought to have reconciled myself to by now. A pause. I find I cannot simply reconcile myself to things. I find I have to understand them. That takes longer. I know, she said. He looked at her for a moment. You told the truth in a room full of people who were depending on you not to, he said. I have thought about that nearly every day since. What it cost you. What it cost him. What it said about the kind of person you are. It said that I am incapable of comfortable dishonesty, she said. It is not a talent I recommend. It causes a great deal of inconvenience. Yes, he said. Then, Cecily. The use of her given name, the first time in his voice, was deliberate. She heard the deliberateness. She felt it in the same place where the compass had rested for 5 years. She waited. I would like to begin again, he said. Not as a contract, not as an arrangement, as something else. He looked at his hands, which were resting on his knees, which was a place she had not seen his hands rest before. If you are willing. She thought about what she had been before this house, and what she had become inside it, and what she had given away in a dining room on the 5th evening of her presence here, and what she had found in the months since, in the slow accumulation of his company, his restraint, the quality of his watching, the way he had stood up in a room full of people and said what he had said and let it be enough. She reached into her pocket and produced the compass, her compass, the silver disc with its hair-thin needle, and she set it on the writing table between them. I have always found, she said, that if you hold it still long enough, it simply shows you the way. He looked at the compass on the table. He looked at her. Something moved through his face that she could not name and did not need to, because it was visible, and that was enough. He put his hand over hers, and she let him. And outside the window of the morning room, the grounds of Aldermere were greening into the particular soft, luminous green of an English spring that does not hurry, but arrives, in the end, completely. If her story moved you, leave a word in the comments below. She earned the spring.